Right, I think we will make a start. We've still got a number of people joining, but as it's gone midday, we'll get underway. So welcome everyone. My name is Will Frazer from the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, and thank you very much for joining our fourth session of these Farming for Change Reach to Action workshops, where we're exploring a whole host of ideas and areas around agroecology. So the Commission is relatively new, and our role is to bring together unusual combinations of people and organisations to find radical and practical ways forward to improve our climate, our economy, and nature and health. And we've got three particular themes which we're interested in, which is healthy food is everybody's business, farming can be a force for change, and getting a countryside that works for all. The focus of these sessions and this piece of work is really about exploring the recommendation to explore a potential fully agroecological food and farming system in the UK by 2030. So we started that journey last year, and we have published some sort of academic and technical modelling examining that idea. And what we're keen to do now for these sessions is really to try and make sense of some of that and try and bring up the theory, some of the theory off the paper and into reality, and sort of ground truth it in people's lives and the reality of people's situations and businesses in the UK. So that's why we're all here today, to do that sort of collective sense making, and we really appreciate your time and hopefully contributing your ideas and your thoughts and reactions to this in the session today. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. The session will be recorded and will be available afterwards, and hopefully we're also doing some write-up and analysis of what people are saying throughout as well, which hopefully is helpful. But it'd be great to see as many of you as possible on the call. It's very much a conversation, this, as opposed to a webinar or just a series of presentations. So please do, show us who you are, and also do let us know in the chat where you're coming from today and why you're here. It'd be great to hear from all of you in that regard. So the structure of the session, we've got 5 panelists to give us a sense of their perspectives in this area today. So really excited to introduce them to you in just a moment. And throughout the session, we'll go one by one, and we'll take 5 questions and sort of engineer discussion around the issues they're raising as we go. So the subject focus today, in previous sessions, we've talked about the technical aspects of our agronomy. We've talked about sort of land management and land use issues. Last week, we talked about the economics and food prices. And this week, we're sort of tackling what for us is a really important but kind of massive subject of our culture. And that is enormous, almost, to try and think we're going to do an hour and a half on talking about that in itself. But there were really some areas which kick-started our thinking on this, and that was really the association. Increasingly, we were finding when people were talking about agroecology, or those people who have been practicing it for a long time, a lot of reference was made to mindsets and also to the sort of the knowledge intensiveness of it, and also to a sort of an attitude and spirit of collaboration. So we were keen to find out more about that, and that's what we hope we're going to do today. So we've got a great panel to talk that through. We have Nikki Yoxall from Aberdeenshire, who's a farmer, and I say wears many hats, but lots of different areas of interest and expertise, but I'll let her introduce herself in a little while. We have McDonald from Natural England, who has been a real instigator of farm facilitation groups across England. We have Tess Howe from the Ahdb. Ben Andrews, a farmer from Herefordshire, who actually really set us running with this whole idea of the need for more collaboration. And then finally, we've got Jenny Phelps from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, who has been operating in the world of farm advice and environmental advice to farms for a long time. So lots of collective wisdom to bring to the table today. and hopefully we're also aware there's a huge amount of expertise on the call as well. So please do chip in as we go. What I'm going to do first, I'm just going to hand over to Sue Pritchard, Chief Executive of the Food Farming Countryside Commission, just to say a few opening remarks to get the session going. Sue.
Thank you, Will, and I'm really, really looking forward to this session today. I've enjoyed all of these sessions so far, but I am especially fascinated by conversations about changing culture. I've been doing that kind of work for well over 30 years now, and have come to realise that whilst there's often a lot of talk about changing culture, particularly in organisational life, it is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Imagine, if you will, a beautiful flower, let's say a convolvulus that shows up in your garden with a beautiful flower and wonderful structures holding it up and supporting it. Very often people think about culture as the kind of what things look like, how we do things around here, how you understand an organisation or a place or a village or a team or a community by what you see when you turn up. In a farm context, it might be whether the farm is clean or tidy or a little bit messy or well concreted or full of large machinery. But those of you who know convolvulus well, otherwise known as bindweed, will also know that that beautiful presenting flower relies on an incredibly vigorous root system, and a root system that travels underground in the soil for miles. At least it feels like that way in our house. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about the things that we can see around us that give us clues about how things are around here. But actually, when we talk about working with culture, we're also talking about changing deep-rooted mindsets and assumptions that are held in place by, if you like, the emotional ground of an organisation or a sector or an industry. And when we're talking about changing farming culture, there are so many dimensions of that deep emotional ground that drives behaviours. So we're talking about the kinds of things that we've lived with for 60 years, how it's really important that farmers feed the nation, how farmers steward the countryside, or how farming provides healthy and nutritious food for all. Those are really deep-rooted assumptions. So talking about changing culture is much more than about changing knowledge or skills or even policy contexts. It's being able to talk about the kind of deep assumptions, how we think about the work that we do, why we do it, why it matters to us, why it's important about it. And it's often very hard to talk about those things because we often don't even acknowledge them for ourselves. So perhaps when we have a chance to chat in the chat box in the side, and when we're hearing from our speakers today, you might want to reflect on, when we're talking about changing farming systems, which we know we need to do, we're also talking about changing some really deep-rooted assumptions about what farming is for, what agriculture is for, what we're all here to do. And those are some really, really big questions. It's a big challenge, but it's the one that's in front of us. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have got to say on it today.
Super. Thank you so much, Sue, for getting us going. Before I hand over to our first speaker, just a short mention that we do have a sort of a survey that goes alongside this session, which you can either complete if you're a really good multitasker throughout the session, but if you're not, then something that can look at afterwards. And this has been really valuable to us in terms of collecting the way that other people explain some of the concepts we're talking about, collecting some of your views in more detail, perhaps than you might want to share in the chat or publicly, and yeah, a real sense of like, what are some of the big barriers and opportunities in this space that we need to be getting on with, and that's certainly that the work and duty of the Commission over the coming months is to to grasp with some of these really difficult, knotty problems. So please do help us with that as we go along. Right, so let's get underway, and I'm going to hand over to Nikki Yoxall to start us off, all the way from the Cairngorms, or near the Cairngorms in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. Over to you, Nikki.
Thanks, Will, and good afternoon, everybody. When I was asked to consider how we change culture and the role of knowledge and skills in that change, I immediately looked as an educator to education and the role it plays. I want to show a brief history of education to help set the scene of why I think there are so many challenges now in developing agricultural education programmes that equip the next generation with the knowledge, skills and mindset needed when thinking of our food production systems as ecosystems, which is ultimately the basis of agroecology. So the Industrial Revolution brought several important changes to the field of education. Importantly, it made education accessible for children of all socioeconomic backgrounds, and it set laws making education a requirement. So it established education as a right, not as a privilege, and there was no question that this was an excellent move. The development then of a national curriculum meant that every student across the country was learning the same thing at roughly the same age, and this meant that every employer had access to a consistent batch of equally qualified potential employees to fit into their production-focused business models wherever they were located. And if people moved around the country, which was on the increase as a result of industrialisation, then there was no disparity in what they knew or had learned. So every employer had this generic set of people that they could call on to fit into their business. And as the late Sir Ken Robinson identified, that led to us even now treating education as a factory production system, with batches of pupils and students collated by date of manufacture, their age, with outputs that serve the needs of a post-industrial economy that is focused on growth, yield, productivity. There's a growing number of researchers, farmers, growers and people who eat who see the future of food and farming being agroecological. I would imagine many of us here in this meeting probably do. The skills and mindset required to shift business as usual towards this path are not reflected in current agricultural education, which is still based on this post-industrial paradigm in terms of design. And even when new qualifications are being developed, are stuck in conventional patterns. And they're informed through the development stages by stakeholders and educators, also stuck in those conventional patterns, heavily reliant on inputs and fossil fuels. The chemical prescription approach teaches our students to address symptoms, not the root cause. We have agriculture and horticulture students who know more about sheds than soil, more about business planning than biology, and more about machinery than ecological functioning. And that isn't to say that business planning, sheds and machinery aren't important, but they absolutely require context and consideration within a wider agro-ecosystem. What we require is a shift in education that guides and promotes new ways of working, that is built around social learning opportunities, that delivers at its heart regenerative principles, not extractive practices. And whilst it's possible to enrol on a course with the Biodynamic College or become holistic management certified, these programs tend to be ideal for those already on this path who've recognised that the standard approach isn't the only way. Students engaging in agroecological education deserve to experience what it is to be part of a growing ecology, understanding their place as part of a community, developing confidence in taking the principles and associated practices and applying them to their own unique contexts. As educators and farmers, we have a responsibility to promote and facilitate critical thinking, knowledge synthesis, and action research. Planning, doing, studying, adjusting, reflecting, planning again. Teaching agroecology doesn't just require new knowledge, it requires a new educational paradigm and new ways of thinking. As Will mentioned, I currently wear a number of hats: educator, coordinator, leader, curriculum developer, farmer, facilitator, mostly directly linked to agroecology and regenerative farming. Those of us working, learning and creating in this space recognise the value and power of community. As a farmer, the most powerful learning experiences I have involve speaking to my peers, friends and colleagues, hearing about what works for them, visiting their farms, getting my hands dirty in the fields, and as I found out quite recently, putting my nose deep into a handful of someone else's soil and taking a deep breath. Asking questions, synthesising knowledge, their knowledge with my own, tweaking, adapting and reviewing as necessary. When we can again, getting out onto farms, seeing what folk are doing, asking questions, testing this out on a small scale back at home are all so important in building our own agroecological toolkits. Social media, Twitter in particular, has played a key role for me in learning how others are applying regenerative principles to their own practice, and active WhatsApp groups take this even further. I'm a member of a grazing discussion group and have participated in government-funded and Soil Association facilitated field labs and risk groups. This is not one-size-fits-all advice. There are no prescriptions there. Instead, the experience and knowledge of group members is celebrated, teased out, shared. There is no such thing as a stupid question. It is a very safe learning space. I currently do some work with the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, and in that we are working with research institutes and farmers in collaboration to develop the science that underpins or explains what we see on farm. In addition, the network of members groups ably overseen by Charlotte Wheeler, as well as our facilitated UK-wide monthly members meetups, create opportunities for discussion and debate. It is these more informal communities of practice that are really making a difference to those who are already on the agroecological journey. Of course, we now exist in the age of the webinar and podcast, and these are making learning and exchange so much easier to access and more inclusive than we have ever experienced before, with a wealth of excellent resources available to those who have the inclination to go looking for them. I'm currently working with the Nature Friendly Farming Network on a recent knowledge transfer project, developing farmer films, highlighting nature-friendly approaches, shows how capable we are of doing this, even when we're distributed all over hundreds of miles and can't travel. The Land Workers Alliance, for whom I'm now working to develop accredited agroecological training, are committed to creating, delivering and enabling traineeships, mentoring and a farm start network, as well as the work that I'm focused on, an accredited vocational qualification in agroecology. Others are developing this at degree level, such as SIUC in Scotland within the Department for Integrated Land Management, and Schumacher College, with a number of postgraduate options being offered by, amongst others, Harper Adams, RAU, LJMU and Coventry. But agroecology cannot be the preserve and privilege of graduates and those willing to invest further time and money in postgrad study and research. We need to be delivering this new approach, these ideas, and building these communities rhizomatically at every education level. This means getting this stuff in front of those who may be least interested and pushing them outside their comfort zone to experience learning in a different way, to understand how it feels to be part of an expanding community, who cheer and support you from the sidelines, who challenge robustly but with respect, and whose sharing of experience creates and sustains confidence in everyone they encounter. I fear I may have gone a little off-piste from what the brief the wonderful team at the FFCC gave me, but the bottom line is we can't fix this issue seeking and applying the same old prescriptive advice that we have before. We have to be prepared to fail. We have to teach ourselves and others what it is to fail, to learn, to try again. And we have to develop the growth mindset Carol Dweck has been telling the education sector about for years. Yes, I've dropped some names and projects in here for you to go away and look at in more detail. And of course, I'm always happy to talk more about them. But you know what? It really is up to us to find, develop and share the learning that we need. Learning that is multifaceted, complex, dependent on relationships, full of opportunities to fail. Learning that is reminiscent of and must be embedded within our own ecosystems and ecologies. As a sector, I think somebody's not on mute. Oh, there we go. As a sector, we must apply pressure to colleges, universities, awarding bodies, government funding agencies to review existing agriculture and horticulture education. And I can assure you that those of us in the position to do so absolutely are knocking on the relevant doors and banging on that drum. But if everyone engaging in an existing agroecological community of practice or network got just one additional person to engage, think of the impact that could have, that change that could be enabled. Our farming principles start with the soil. Our approach to culture change has to be from the ground up.
Super, thank you, Nikki. Yeah, a tour de force on the education system. The first question back to you, Nikki, if I might, and it was just it's from a comment made by Catherine Mack, and really about, I guess the way I've interpreted it is the changing culture, and we're calling for a shift in paradigm in our education system. does not feel like a speedy thing to do. But yet some of the challenges in front of us are like, we need to be responding very, very quickly. Is there, I guess what I was keen to ask, like, you've been in agricultural education and worked at colleges and for quite a while. Have you seen, are we on a direction of travel where that's improving, or are we still on a direction of travel that's going the opposite direction? What's your sense?
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that's being done in this space is happening away from colleges. There are some universities that are picking up on that, but generally your standard vocational FE college isn't really doing this. And a lot of them actually are being supported to take a more intensive approach. So I was really lucky to work at a college where we had an almost pasture-based, well, pretty much pasture-based system for dairy and also for sheep production, and massively reduced inputs. And for us, it was about money saving. If we could make our farm function as a standalone entity without being part of the college necessarily, then that demonstrated success. And it was a way for us to show students that you could financially be viable. So sometimes the approaches aren't always, they're not given the context of agroecology. You might see those types of principles, but they're done from a financial basis or a financial starting point. I think that there is a shift, and there are definitely lecturers out there who are interested in looking at things differently. But let's remember, if you're delivering a vocational program, you have to be confined by what the awarding bodies are asking you to deliver and to assess. So where there is scope to go a little bit off-piste and kind of give alternative viewpoints on things, ultimately students will be asked to provide prescriptive answers to a particular set of questions that they may have, that their learning will definitely be based, for example, on, if they're looking at soil, it's all about NPK and pH and not necessarily thinking more about biological functioning. So while there is a requirement, and I think space for lecturers and programs to start dipping a toe into this, it has to come from elsewhere to enable that. And I think it's really interesting, and it does demonstrate that ground up approach that other organisations like the Land Workers Alliance, like Schumacher College, like a number of councils are paying for traineeships to take place on farm in different parts of the country, particularly happening in Devon and Dorset. Then we are seeing other people funding this, and that's great that it's happening, but it's happening kind of alongside and not necessarily encompassing colleges, and I think that's where we need to see a bit more of a change. I think it will happen, but it just will be slow.
Yeah, super. And then just a question about I guess you've been talking about like across the educational system and across the whole population of people, and obviously a lot of people aren't at the stage of needing to go to college or at that stage of life, and there's an awful lot of learning that we're seeing happening in these more informal communities, and that's really sort of taken on a real lease of life, I think, with the situation we find ourselves in and the use of Zoom and all of this sort of thing. And do you see that continuing, and what does life look like once we're able to be on the ground more and in fields and on farms together, and once the geography becomes a bit more confined? I think certainly what we're finding is that suddenly you're able to attach yourselves to people like in parts of the country or in different areas and learn from them very quickly, where the opportunity just wouldn't have been there before, would it? So like, how do you see this unfolding over the next couple of years and carrying on the momentum of these communities of practice which have started?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, isn't it? And it really demonstrates the power of community and social learning. And there's loads of research from an education point of view in how powerful the social element of learning is. And we're seeing it unfold. I think what I'm worried about, just from a time management point of view, and as someone who wears many hats, that takes up a lot of stress for me, is we've been able to engage with all this stuff because we haven't been out and about. And then suddenly we're probably still going to have all this online stuff to engage with, as well as trying to be out and about. And so there's, we might feel like we're missing out on things. But I think over the next year or two, we'll get to a really kind of steady state place where actually we're very used to combining on the ground, on farm discussions and opportunities to learn with kind of backup that's supported online. So maybe, for example, the grazing group that I'm in, we meet like once a month through Zoom, but I imagine in the future there'll be great opportunities to then supplement that with farm visits as well. So I think that we'll find a like blend, we would call it in education a blended approach, where you're doing a bit online and a bit face to face. So I think that that blend will certainly develop and can only be a good thing.
Super, thank you, Nikki. We'll let you off the hook there for a moment, but everyone, please do keep your questions, comments, observations coming as we go through, and I know speakers will be happy to pick them up in the chat or when we get time at the end of the call. So yeah, I'm going to come to Brian McDonald from Natural England next. Hi, Brian. Hope you're there. And yeah, really keen to hear the work and the learnings about facilitation funds and bringing groups of farmers together across the country. So Brian, over to you.
Thanks, Will. Yep, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Brian McDonald. I'm a Senior Advisor for Natural England, which is a government body that deals with the natural environment, sitting under the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been involved with both setting up and running the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund. As others have said, you know, this is a really interesting time. I was given a specific 3 questions to address as my contribution to today, which I hope I can do. One of them was to look at the learning from the course of the Facilitation Fund to date. The second was to look at the potential for farm advice and facilitation for scaling up agroecological approaches. And then the third was to look at the cultural challenges and opportunities around collaboration in different landscapes and how we might be able to learn and apply that as we go forward. So it is a really interesting time. You know, we've spent the last year dealing with COVID and hopefully got some light at the end of the tunnel, but that remains to be seen. It's also very fascinating time in terms of policy and government direction, particularly around land management, with major change underway. We had the agricultural bill that passed towards the end of last year, and we're hopeful that the Environment Bill will proceed, which is a bearing on some of this stuff that we want to talk about here today as well. So I hope the Environment Bill does progress, because a large part of what it wants to do is to look at farming advice and around and how spatial prioritisation might take place in the future. But as I say, the context, and I think the challenges we face, it's not just COVID, it's not just the change in government policy, but it's recognising that the biodiversity and climate crises are in our face and adding a sort of real challenge to what we do and how we respond to it. So that how we manage uncertainty and how we respond is really critical, and hopefully some of what we've been exploring will be to everybody here. The other thing, just by way of context, is that I'm not a farmer. I have worked with farmers over the 25, 30 years of my career, most notably in Zimbabwe, where I spent 3 years working with peasant farmers. But I have I keep 4 ducks, I've got a big garden, and I live in the edge of an AONB. So I am sort of agriculturally orientated, although not directly involved in production. Okay, so the Facilitation Fund, what is it? It was set up in 2015 on the back of learning and needs coming from the Nature Improvement Areas programme, which looked at ways in which we could do things at a more integrated and landscape scale. So the connection for me in this is more from an ecological, spatial, planning type setup than it is directly related to agriculture. But the need to combine agricultural land use practices with ecological ambition is absolutely critical. So the Facilitation Fund was set up in response to that big ambition. And at its heart, it's to enable groups of farmers and land managers to collaborate in an integrated sort of way to receive environmental advice and training to raise knowledge, skills, and secure positive delivery of land management options on the ground. Primarily, it's focused on subsidies and schemes. So the countryside stewardship connection is really important because it gives a clear line of sight between the training advice to actual delivery on holdings. And it allows the opportunity to address evidence-based priorities that we want to see things done in particular areas to be done in a sort of flexible, bottom-up way that is informed by, if you like, a partnership of the willing rather than being a top-down directive to force people to do stuff that they might not want to. So the priorities generally, we're looking at soil, water quality, flood risk, habitat management, restoration, creation, looking now into potentially bringing in things like air quality as part of what we need to do to address, as well as how we manage species introductions and habitat management. So it is a lofty ambition around the ecological aspects of what we're trying to achieve, and it is if you like, a functional model and mechanism as to how that's done. So how is it done? It requires a minimum of 4 adjoining or nearly adjoining land owners and land managers to form a group. If they form a group of that size, we give a funding amount of £12,000 per annum to initiate a training programme that will run for 3 years. But the group size really is interesting, because although it can start with that minimum number, it can grow up to and beyond 80. So there's a threshold, if you like, in terms of funding that we apply to enable this training advice, which is 50,000 based on an absolute maximum model of 80 farmers collaborating in a group. So that gives an idea of numbers involved. The scale is interesting, because to get that landscape scale is an interesting question. What is it? It's not a fixed rule, but it's a direction of travel. And what we did was we aimed to have a minimum of 2,000 hectares as a qualifying threshold, but if a case can be made to justify a smaller area, that would be acceptable too, given the kind of issues that they might want to address. So there is flexibility. There's a range of scales and sizes of groups that have been set up since 2015 to address their environmental ambition. We are, as I say, 5 years in now with some serious sort of learning and delivery lessons coming from the experience to date. So set up in 2015 with a budget of £7.2 million, sounds good. The first round, we produced 19 groups from that. It started work in 2015 for a period of 5 years. A further 81 groups joined between 2016 and 2017, bringing the numbers up to just under 100. In 2018, the entire countryside stewardship vehicle and ownership of that moved from Natural England to the Rural Payments Agency, which was a little bit of a bump on the journey, but hopefully nothing that's going to detract from the direction that we've set and the ambition that we're pursuing. So there's over 100 groups that were set up under the Natural England sort of jurisdiction. And since the RPA took over, we've had a further round, which has produced a further 38 groups, bringing it up to 136 groups across the country who have had funding and training advice provided through this fund for periods of 3 to 5 years. So that's interesting, because it gives an idea of the momentum that's been created in a short space of time to create and establish groups of farmers and land managers from a variety of backgrounds and associations working in a geography or addressing a common issue to collaborate and to develop training and advice programs that work for them. It encourages peer-to-peer learning and, if you like, action research to, if you like, inform that knowledge exchange and hopefully inspire people to do more things on their land as a result. So, as I say, it's eminently logical, but there's a major cultural shift, because subsidies and the way that farm advice had been delivered in this country primarily over the last 50 years or so has been on a one-to-one basis. So having some shift, recognising that a group dynamic could actually provide benefits and merits beyond a single farm, a single site, direct advice, has proven to be a very interesting sort of aspect of what we've done, and led to some interesting and unexpected but very helpful outcomes from the process to date. So we've got a key role there. We need, obviously the land managers and farmers to be working as a group within this sort of rough approximate geography. We have exceptions for if there's a need or an opportunity to have a group working on a more dispersed basis to address water quality or flood risk. Or, for an example, we have a group of farmers working at a county level in Herefordshire restoring meadows. And so they're using the funding to instill knowledge and experience and actually help to transform and rebuild the number and extent of meadows in Herefordshire as a sort of as an example of what the fund can do. So, as I say, the facilitator and coordinator sort of role within that is critical. It can be a farmer. We have farmer-led groups. Around 15% of the 138 groups are farmer-led, but the other groups are led by coordinators, facilitators who come from a variety of backgrounds, including land agents, NGO advisors, independents as well. So we have a range of types, from direct peer-to-peer exchange through to sort of land agents and more traditional sort of farm advice deliverers, through to NGOs and also sort of bodies like AONBs, national parks, using this as a way to help provide the sort of jigsaw pieces of their ambition for ecological restoration in their areas too. So that's if you like a sort of rough run through as to what the fund is about and how it works. But critical, as I say, is this idea of identifying priorities, having enough economy of scale, if you like, with numbers and land mass to actually make a difference from that to see action on the ground. And we've applied a sort of a theory of change model because a lot of what we're trying to enact is going to take time to deliver. So understanding the inputs around the training and advice through to the outputs from countryside stewardship agreements or other resources that are brought into a group's sort of a toolkit is part of the fund too. Critically, as I say, it's an ecological focus, so the primary activity that the trade provides around biodiversity and water management is delivered on that sort of one-to-many group basis. And as mentioned, that in itself has brought an interesting cultural dynamic to play by the mere creation of a group and getting neighbours who might not have spoken together or even acknowledged each other into one place around a common purpose to drive that change on the ground. So it's, as I say, it is interesting, and some of those social consequences and outcomes from providing group training on ecological functionality and natural environment issues is shown to be effective in helping to break down cultural barriers, increasing social activity, demystifying and helping people to get to know the neighbours for positive outcomes too. So that's part of what it does. Is say the connection with schemes. It has been an interesting sort of point, because you could say this is the kind of thing that could operate independent of schemes, but because it is attached to countryside stewardship, there's a direct link between a group's activity and the expectation that some of these educational sort of pluses translate into agreements that allow the hard delivery of these things to take place on the ground. And when that starts to aggregate at scale, you can see the viability of species recovery, habitat functionality starting to manifest in a way that perhaps we need to, and perhaps not been able to do to the extent we require for the future. So what have I learned? So luckily, throughout the whole 5 years of my experience with this, I've been able to run monitoring evaluations. So I've got evidence-based stuff that's coming back around what's been done. So that's good. In essence, I mean, essentially, in terms of what effect it has on schemes and countryside stewardship, has been positive. We've got better aligned agreements, better option deployment. And as I was saying, that the social outcomes from the activity is proving fantastic in terms of well-being, improving people's resilience to how they deal with change. So there is recognisable impact even at this early stage of what is a long-term ambition. And as mentioned at the start, we are going through a period of major change. You know, this is a time of great uncertainty, both in relation to the big things around the crisis we face, but equally in terms of how land management subsidies will develop and be applied. And that collaboration, I think, is providing a useful sort of mechanism to help build resilience, improve the dialogue between policy and delivery, and hopefully will help to shape the future into something quite exciting that gets us to a more agroecological sort of outcome.
Super.
So there's huge potential. Farm advice is an interesting area. There's both in this country and internationally. If you think that subsidies in this country, I think roughly about £3 billion a year. The farm advice component of that, I haven't got an accurate picture, but it's certainly significant. And as I said, with the small budget we've used with the Facilitation Fund to date, has unpicked quite a number of unintended or unexpected outcomes. But the production side of things is really interesting. Personally, and in terms of the cultural challenges that we face, obviously, if you're dealing with 7% or so of the farmed environment is under direct ownership, 30% tenanted. Within that, we've got large estates, so large arable intensive holdings, as well as a number of small holders in different parts of the country. And how we get that blend of food production that works with the community to improve food resilience and natural environment solutions to the crises we face is all up for grabs. So it is an exciting time. I think what the Facilitation Fund has done is it's helped to unleash this power and potential of collaboration and the multiple benefits that flow from that being tangible and, as I say, exciting and proving to be a benefit to those that are involved in the programme currently.
Super. Brian,
okay.
Thank you. There's lots of, I guess quite practical questions coming through in the chat. So I was just wondering maybe if you're able to pick some of those up individually. But I wanted to come back to you with one question, which is really just about, I guess it's the issue of trust. And you referred at the very start, like moving to a more bottom up kind of approach, less top down, less directive. And it's really good to hear, actually open to having unintended consequences and sort of virtuous benefits, which weren't necessarily planned for, but you created the principles for those to happen. Is that something we can look forward to seeing more of in future government policy? Is it a learning that's going back up the track, which people are going, yes, this is actually really positive, and there's stuff that we need to be translating into bigger action?
I certainly hope so. And from what I understand, the influence of the groups and the members involved have played a key part in shaping the new scheme. So with the sustainable farming incentive, the nature recovery element and the landscape recovery part of the new scheme, then yeah, absolutely, I'm very hopeful. The detail obviously will be determined, but already there are pilots that a number of the groups that have been established for the Facilitation Fund have played into. So that dialogue with, if you like, policy development, and particularly the evidence that we've been able to accumulate around the experiences and whatnot are really important. So that co-design aspect is really exciting. It's a good thing to have. But the trust element, absolutely critical, because in a natural England role, we play a part in both a sort of a regulator as well as a catalyzer, and not always able to play that sort of enabling sort of part, either because there's a regulatory issue or some sort of a statutory function we've got to deploy. So having that ability to encourage both farmer-led peer-to-peer learning, where the farmer has got the skills and knowledge and the confidence to do that, is genuinely exciting. Similarly, with the opportunity for groups like FWAG and others who have been providing farm advice to do this is great for them too, potentially. And even for the NGOs where they've got that experience of doing it. But the critical thing is this, is that unless the group itself wants to have that engagement, it's not going to work. So the buy-in of the group and the dynamic between the coordinator and the group membership is absolutely critical to the success of what we're trying to do. So it is an important element. Yeah. And I think the flexibility of how we construct it allows that peer-to-peer, as well as the expert advice being able to input, is great. You know, so absolutely fantastic. Trust, flexibility, and getting the right expertise on the right subject is critical.
Super. Right, Brian, we're gonna get more of this, I know, from Jenny later in the call as a lead operator of some of these groups in Gloucestershire. So yeah, we'll certainly be revisiting in a short while, but just I'm mindful of time, and I'm really bad on keeping things to time, so we will keep going. Just a reminder, just thank you for lots of really good questions coming in. We're certainly really keen to pick some of them up towards the end of the call, so please do keep them coming. But without further ado, I'm going to come to Tess from Ahdb to talk about perhaps lots of learnings in a long tenure of knowledge transfer and skills development in agriculture, and lots of great work from the strategic and monitor farm network and peer-to-peer learning, but also to talk a little bit perhaps about the idea of the forthcoming the Institute of Agriculture and Horticulture. So Tess, over to you. Thanks
very much, Will. And I'm having a few connection issues, so if you lose me, give me a big wave, because I can still see and hear all you guys, but I understand people are missing me. So yeah, I'm the Senior Skills Manager at Ahdb, and that's part of the Business Insight and Skills team. And really we're looking at improving the skills space and supporting farmers across their business through empowering them and their knowledge. My role largely is around leadership and management training, and I think that's really fundamental for any change in the business, is that actually it's a sound business to start off with, and they've got that scope to make those changes. So we do quite a lot of work at looking at the business side and the people side in particular, which is where my focus is. And what we tried to do now, because it's often an area that people don't engage with, even though they need it, and there's sort of a lack of awareness, and we've started doing more of a journey by doing webinars, which are more of the bite-sized high-level information, just to get people interested, not too much of a commitment for them. They can sit at home and listen into that, but making sure that whatever we do in those webinars really has some tools or some templates that they can go away and have some point for action straight after that webinar. And then we follow that through with day or part day training physical, where people can actually come together under normal circumstances on webinars and Zoom nowadays, but come together and really dig into a bit more detail and get a bit more personalised help for them and their business, and how they're moving things forward and how they can apply it, how they can learn from others from that peer-to-peer learning as well. And that then extends on to multi-day programs. And one of the successes we have with those, which are actually accredited learning and management programs, is the peer network that we put with that. So we don't just put people together because of their capability to do the course. It's actually how they would fit a peer group and how they would build that support group together. And we find that when we do the reviews at the end of these sessions, really that network has been a driver to them sticking with the program, because sometimes they're 14 months long, they're big programs, but really getting a support and constructive challenge. Nikki's mentioned it before as well, that real friendly, but why are you doing that? Could you not do it this way? We've learned that, we've done it different ways, and those kind of conversations often yield better results than sometimes the formal training can do as well. And the other key learning that we've got from that is really sitting people down to review the changes they've made, because when you're doing programs over a long period of time, and when you're making changes over a period of time, it's easy to not see those changes and see those impacts. So actually having people really focus on what difference they've made, what impacts it's had, and is there a bottom line to that, or is it just it's more environmentally beneficial, etc. So really making people focus on what they've changed and how it's implemented. And we also do reviews throughout the program where they can challenge each other and say, look, I tried this, it didn't work. What would you do in your circumstance? What would you do in your scenario? And we really see a lot of change from that. And we see people, as they build that trust, coming with bigger and bigger problems and more serious issues, or more challenges where they think actually they're going to change the direction of the business. And that confidence with that group, you really can't underestimate if you want to instigate some change of putting that peer network together. So from a leadership and management point of view, that brings it together. What we also do is cross the sectors, and mix the audience as well. So we will try and put young and old together so that we get a mix of attitude and experience. But actually the cross sector has been the most beneficial part for us. So when I first started out, I was doing it in the pork industry. Now we do it across all 6 sectors of horticulture, and taking those farmers out of their own comfort zone. Partly it's been really good because they don't talk about their own specific technical issues, they talk about the bigger picture, which is a problem for everybody, but it's given them a different perception. And I remember with one of them, we took some pork farmers onto a horticulture site and they were harvesting leeks. And the pork farmers could not get over the waste that was happening in that harvest process. And they would not let it lie with this producer and the grower until they'd worked out how to get rid of all of his waste and what he could do and how he could run his system differently. And he did. He's now got a packing line for casserole veg and he's not wasting anything. So it's that different opinion and different vision of what people want to do, I think, is really good for challenging people. And it won't always work, but it gives people some safety in trying different things and considering them as well. So definitely taking people out of the comfort zone. The other element that you'll probably all be a bit more familiar with is our monitor farms and strategic farms, which form part of our farm excellence platform. The monitor farms were originally set up with the whole concept that we know people like that peer-to-peer chat. They like to have a nosy around somebody else's farm. They quite often like somebody else to try something out first and keep a close eye on what's going on and listen and see the impact of that. So monitor farms were set up and they're on a 3-year program so that we can spend time going through that entire business and all the different changes. You can see the different impacts it has across the business, not just on one issue. And we see those, they're growing in popularity, and as even going online, we really worried about how they would work online, and they've taken off quite well as well. And we actually get in online people that we know would never physically attend an event, but actually are finding some comfort in visiting us online. And it's something to take forward as we move back to, do we all just fall back into the norm? And I think it's like Nikki mentioned, we'll probably end up with a mix. But it's going to have to be quite a careful, thought out mix to make sure that everybody's getting what they need and that individual element. So the strategic farms are a lot more technical focused. There will be a farm and it's very industry specific, and we will look at one very, is it mastitis on a farm, is it lameness, etc., and then look at all the different options for resolving those problems. So it could be very different elements, but very specific on that farm, and that might be a shorter process or it might be a very long process as well. The other elements that we have is discussion groups and the or pig clubs, as we call them in pork, and technical events as well. And it might seem that we have lots of different routes of doing this, but it's really about remembering that lots of people take things differently. So we will see from our evaluation that discussion groups are really popular in the pork industry. They've been there for a long time. Again, they're built on trust. When we first started those, we would do it very anonymized data. Discussion groups tend to be built around benchmarking and that kind of thing. And it was built around anonymized data. It wasn't long before the group was saying, but who is that person that's always at the top? Why am I not at the top? What can I do differently? And actually that drive for, well, somebody else is doing it, so it's actually possible for me, can make a real big difference to someone changing their opinion on what they want to do and what they can achieve on their own farm. So we know that we need those different opportunities for different people. Moving forward, what we're looking at is a much more, how do we implement behaviour change in whatever we're doing? It's okay as transferring knowledge, but if all we're doing is transferring knowledge, then we're not actually going to make any great shakes in the industry. We're not going to make any great changes. So how do we actually implement that behaviour change, which is what we're all looking for? And we've now taken on an approach called CASI, where we really delve deep before we think about, well, we're going to run a discussion group on that, or we're going to run a campaign and produce lots of leaflets and booklets. It's really looking at what is the current behaviour and what is the behaviour we want people to do, and what is that gap, and then about bridging that gap and how we break it down gradually. So really about what's the facts and the figures, the evidence behind that behaviour, why has it become so established, and how can we start that change process? And that really involves looking at the behaviour analysis. So who influences those behaviours? Is it the people around them, society? Is it the environment that they're working in? Is it what they've always done, etc.? And looking at really one of those, is it the norm? Is it different to do things that aren't normal, and is that sort of stand out a little bit. So really understanding what are the drivers currently, and really understanding as well, do they have the knowledge to change? Do they understand the benefits? Do they understand the disadvantages? Are they in a position where they can make that educated decision about what will work for them? And how can we provide that information in a way that they'll receive, that's not going to be too difficult for them to understand or too difficult for them to accept that they need to change? And really looking at, if we want that change, what do they need resource wise? It's all right saying, oh, we should all change to this, but actually, how do we know that they've got the knowledge, the skills and the resources to implement those changes that they really want to do and they can see the benefit to, but actually just can't get over that first barrier? So bringing those down and understanding what the target group is can really then help us in the method that we use to transfer the knowledge, and that are we using gentle nudges? Are we using sort of your traffic signs when it goes green when you drive at the right speed, or you get a big angry face when you're going too fast? Or there's some really things, I think it's in Stockholm, they wanted more people to travel upstairs, so they put an actual piano on the stairs so that as you ran up and down you played a song, and it got more people moving. Is it that kind of behavior that we need to do, that we can make people change things because they're just trying different things out? And so once we understand all of that behavior and the habits around that behavior, then we can start to look at what the actual campaign strategy is. And that's what we're looking to do now, and improve the impact that we have. So it's not just talking at everybody, it's actually seeing and instigating change. The other element that you mentioned, Will, is the Institute for Agriculture and Horticulture, and hopefully this will also go to address some of Nikki's concerns, because one of the cruxes of the Institute is about a competency framework. So what are the right competencies that a professional farmer or grower need in the future, now and in the future, and how we can build that framework so that people can recognise themselves, they can identify what competencies they have got, what competencies they haven't got, and then the framework will actually map to the learning opportunities, which might be formal courses, it might be CPD opportunities, it might be reading articles from one of the many organisations we've got on the call today. So looking at what we need and then how we can deliver that to farmers, and breaking down those barriers for how they access that training as well, so that they would have a much more direct route to the market and find what's available to them. And that will, if we build that with the right people, then actually it's a very industry-led way of developing curriculums as well, because we can look at what do the industry need, what have the industry done, and we're looking at developing farmer panels to do this. What do we actually need in real life farming and growing right now that's going to make this work for us? And we can put those competencies in, and we can link them into the ELM scheme, etc. And so then curriculums can be developed around those real life needs, whether it be the formal qualifications or just the CPD. And hopefully, as we have that data, we can collect that anonymously in the background. We can start to see what's missing in the industry as well. What competencies are just people not picking up, not acknowledging that they've got, and then therefore we can direct more resource into developing the right training materials and the right content that would help those people increase that knowledge. And that's probably it in a nutshell, Will. I know you're tight on time, so shall we take questions?
Thank you, Tess. And wow, you covered a lot there, and yeah, some brilliant stuff, and some provoking some really good comments and discussion coming back about how we learn and all the different systems that we have in place already in the industry. I've just got a quick question on it's something that Nikki was referring to in terms of all of the host of areas of like ecological, biological knowledge of how we farm, and what we're talking about in terms of transitioning to a more agroecological approach. Very, very knowledge intensive. Is this a noted gap in some of your work in the Ahdb in terms of what you're seeing within your farms and your network? Yeah, something you're sort of responding to.
I think it's something that's definitely coming through, and we're looking at the different ways of delivering that. The monitor farms and the strategic farms all have steering groups, and it's the farmers that direct the direction of those. So if that's what's coming through on the farms, then that will be what's addressed through those programs as well. And so then it spreads the word around the locality as well.
Yeah, super. And I think one of the things which often gets sort of come back on this sort of area is that that'll never work on my farm kind of response, which I'm quite familiar with. I think I probably said it myself quite a few times. But I was just wondering, is that something you're seeing that's sort of breaking down quite a lot in terms of the sessions and the work that the AHD is doing in the monitor farms and strategic farms? Is that we're starting to realise that actually there's lots of approaches which can work for all sorts of different people in different places?
Yep, definitely. And it comes back to that trusted network and the peer-to-peer learning, where people will say that and challenge and say, well, that's great, but that wouldn't work for me. And you will then get people say, but why? Why will it not work for you? And actually make them think about it, because often it is a throwaway comment and sort of the first barrier that people put up to change. But really it is about bringing that down and saying, well, why? And breaking it down. And with the right people in the room, questioning in the right way, then actually you can get down to it really can work, or in some circumstances it might not work exactly in that way, but looking at alternatives for them as well.
Yeah, and just a comment here from James, maybe an observation on how your mixing of demographics and age and sector has worked. You gave a really good example of the pig farms on the horticulture site, but certainly for perhaps young people and new entrants and people with new techniques that they're proposing in these groups, it can feel like that, yeah, sometimes experience dulls that down a bit. Is there any learning that you're getting at the moment?
I'm not going to deny that's there. It happens in every group, but again, I sound like a bit like a broken record, don't I? It's the trust within the group that gives that safe space for people to challenge and accept other people's opinions or not accept them respectfully. And so I think with the right people as well, and a lot of young people are very educated and have good ideas, and actually if they've given the chance to talk those through and show that it's worked on their farm and it's worked in other situations, then we do get a lot of people stand back and actually respect that and say, well, okay, we'll look at that again. So it's not stopped, it's still there, and I think it will be for a long time, because people have worked hard and got a lot of experience and often had their fingers burnt in things, but it's definitely people are willing to listen now as well.
Yeah, certainly. And then just final one before I let you off the hook, just on the ability for some farms to change direction wholesale. And I think you know what you're talking about in terms of the input, it's quite hard to do that when you're just on your own in your little bubble as a business, but with a network and a peer group around you, then you can actually make quite bold decisions. And I think in the world that we're talking about and moving to more agroecological practices, sometimes it requires quite bold decisions. And there's some, other people have told us, like, don't go cold turkey, like, in terms of like chucking out all of the inputs at once. But equally, some people are, maybe get more willing to do that now with more groups and more confidence and more people in the network around them. Are we getting to a stage where there's enough networking and confidence in groups where there will be a lot more bold decisions within farm businesses, partly because obviously we're at a change in policy, but also big change in climate and a whole host of other challenges on the horizon? Do you think we're going to see some bigger, more like drastic change in direction for a lot of farms?
I personally think we will see a lot of change, and I think it's almost that perfect storm, isn't it? So much is changing in one go that people aren't going to be able to just ride through this one like they've ridden through different changes in the past. And I think there's a lot of consideration, but it goes back to the leadership and management, and why I feel that's so important, because we have so many farmers that say, I don't need management training, I don't employ anybody. Well, actually, you do work with so many people, and as a progressive business, you should have so many advisors working with you and different people feeding into that. That's even a harder job of management, of managing people you don't employ, but you've got to take their advice, understand it, and make your own educated decisions on that. And so I think those kind of management and people skills are really important to help people with this change transition as well.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Tess. I'll let you away now. But yeah, no, lots of good stuff and great comments coming through in the chat. Thank you. Please do keep them coming, and any other questions you've got that's come to mind since other speakers have gone, And also just a little plug again for the survey, and do remember that we've got that online for more detailed feedback as well as we go through. Right, Ben, really good to have you here today. And as I said before, you certainly set us running a little bit on this whole area of knowledge and collaboration between farms, and also the sort of approach of being willing to experiment and try different things. So over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Will. I'll apologise straight off for about 6 dogs constantly whining to be either let in or let out of the office. So hopefully they'll pipe down long enough for me to finish. So I'm a farmer from Herefordshire. We've been organic for 20 years now, so our 20th year, and farm in partnership with my dad. And like a lot of farmers, our family has been farming in Herefordshire, both sides of the family, mum's side and dad's side, for around 400 years. And that's a lot of knowledge to constantly be passed down, as well as the bad habits. I went to agricultural college, like a lot of people, and was told by my lecturer that organic farming wasn't financially sustainable. This was back in the 2000 to 2004 period, so just around the time that we and a lot of other farmers were switching. But I will say, like Nikki mentioned earlier, that agriculture college was all about spreadsheets, working out your internal rate of return for buying a shiny new piece of machinery, and very little about anything that goes on in nature. Although I did learn how birds fly, which I'm not sure how that was really applicable. So fast forward on, and then you finish agriculture college and you get stuck into farm work, and you just, blinkers are on and you're doing what your dad tells you to do because this is the way you do it. Luckily for me, my dad is very he's the one who took us down the organic route. So I pretty much since university was brought up on an organic farm, but it wasn't really until fairly recently that it really started to twig that organic farming was more than just not using chemicals. That there is this agroecological approach and how you work with nature rather than against it. And I'd been on these courses, online courses, or been away on a farm talk, and I think, as a lot of other people have said, you do tend to zone out a little bit. And really probably the last, since lockdown has happened, that I have really started to increase my knowledge on farming and try to pass that on to other people. So whether it's the webinars or whatever, paid training sessions. I met Will on one yesterday. Actually, we were on one about soil health and regenerative agriculture. There's so much knowledge out there. It can all be a bit intimidating, but I think for me the best source of knowledge and way to pass knowledge on has been through social media. And about 3-4 years ago, I started up a social media account, and the idea was to educate the general public about farming and how food is produced and how we produce food on our farm, and show the various different techniques that we use farming organically. And I didn't really expect to get many other farmers following or messaging me who were interested in what I was doing and wanted to know more about it. And then I found other farmers, and another one's on here today, Ed Horton, who's down in Cirencester, and become really good friends with Ed over the last 12 months, and he is completely opposite scale of the farming spectrum to me. Much bigger farm, and conventional with some organic, but we've chatted so much about how, I can maybe adopt some of the practices he uses, he can adopt some of the practices that I use, and I know that he has influenced on social media at least 2 other farmers into grazing their winter cereals, which is, these are not new ideas. A lot of these are really old-fashioned ideas, old-fashioned mixed farming. That there's no, as I say, there's no such thing as a new idea, and it's trying to turn that back round and say, well, there's a reason why it worked this way for so long, because you have a closed nutrient cycle on your farm. You are not constantly exporting organic matter and nutrients from your soil. You are replenishing it with what you take off. And so that's one thing I try to put across with our farm. We are a mixed farm. We have beef cattle that graze the water meadows, that flood constantly, but they're grazing just spring and summer. And then their manure from their house in the winter, their manure goes on our veg ground. We grow brassicas, salad crops, and then we also straw from the cereal production then goes to house the cattle, and it's that cycle that means that we haven't had to use any synthetic inputs for 20 years, and we are no worse for it. I think one of the things that I did recently in the last year was our companion cropping with the vegetables, so putting plants that can attract the beneficial insects. And I think that blows a lot of people's minds, because they think, well, you can't control pests and diseases without chemicals, because how else am I going to stop my brassicas from being eaten by aphids or caterpillars? Well, nature has survived quite a long time by without whole species of plants being completely wiped out by pests, and so we find that we don't have a pest burden at all on our lettuce because of the ladybirds that we encourage. So it's moving on to that sort of collaboration with farmers. The FFCC Farming for Change report sort of highlighted the need to move back towards mixed farming, and I think a lot of farmers are quite intimidated by that thought, because with supply chains, we are very much we are producing commodities, and sort of short of every farmer becoming its own brand and sort of direct selling, a lot of farmers do have to rely on selling of large quantities to larger organizations that then get sold on or go into supermarkets or processed in one way or another. And I think probably sugar is a great example of that, where you have all sugar beet producers sort of centered around sort of like one massive sort of processing area. I mean, sugar is an argument for another day, but it is there is that very real concern that, well, if we're to look to grow more beans and pulses, it's like, well, how do I grow beans and pulses? Who's going to buy my beans and pulses? Is there a market for it? And so I think that's quite daunting for a lot of farmers. And then sort of with the I think we need to not be too dogmatic about things as well. In our we don't want to evangelize too much about agroecology. It has to sort of happen in baby steps, not expecting people to one day just switch the tap off to their artificial inputs, because a lot of the time, you know, if you've got land that is completely devoid of inherent fertility, and you don't have the as I was saying, the companion cropping there, or any habitat for beneficial insects to thrive in, you are going to struggle to grow a successful crop. So I think it's just encouraging people to take these small steps, you know, one little step at a time, maybe try to change something, because that overall farm change overnight is not just, as I say, daunting, but it's also just not really practical. Yeah, I think one of the main bodies that we need to persuade to get on board with it is the NFU, and I think that might be a bit controversial, but the NFU is the always the public face of agriculture, whether it's on TV or radio, you know, in the media. Minette Batt has been a fantastic spokesperson for agriculture, but there are still a lot of very large farmers very resistant to change and very resistant to swap their tankfuls of glyphosate for trace minerals. So I think unless we can really get the NFU on board, I think yeah, I think we might be struggling a bit. But I don't really want to waffle on too much longer, but so I'll probably leave it there. And yeah,
thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much. That was brilliant. I've got going to fire a couple of questions back at you. I know we're really struggling for time now. It's all my fault, but I know, Jenny, you're a very fast speaker, so I'm banking on that to help us catch up. But please do, everyone, please do keep launching your comments and stuff into the chat and questions. I want to come to a point made by Rachel in the chat, which is really coming back to root causes of like motivations and why we farm, and particularly for new people and new entrants and young farmers coming into the sector. And I've noticed that you do actually have quite a lot of people following you on social media, Ben. And I was just wondering what you're learning about engaging with them, about what are they saying that's really important to them? Why are they interested in what you're doing? What is motivating them? And what should we be listening out for in, you know, that sort of generation of people coming through?
I think it's like the new entrance into farming is, again, it's one of the big things, isn't it? That you tend to have two types of new entrant into farming. You've got like Sinead, who have met through the agroecology ambassador program with the Soil Association. You know, she's small scale sort of horticulture growing in Sussex. And she's doing an incredible job, and she's like going out on, you know, her and Adam going on their own, doing their own thing, and are able to, you know, paddle their own canoe, as you like, if you like, learning learning this knowledge and applying it as they go along. But then you've also got, on the other side, you've got agriculture graduates from the big colleges and universities who then may go and work for large agribusinesses, and they get installed into there, and then, you know, the first thing is to get your spraying course and you know, learn how to you know, plow and drill your wheat every year in the same field, and so I think it's, yeah, it's quite hard if you go down that route to maybe change away from the accepted sort of form of agriculture. Yeah,
super. There are loads of other questions coming through, but I'm gonna have to direct it to the chat really, and definitely one to pick up on about family and sort of, yeah, family tradition and culture as it goes through businesses, we're quite a unique industry for that. So I'd be keen to get more people's opinions than yours, Ben, in the chat. But Ben, thank you very much. We'll leave it there for now. And I can come rapidly to Jenny Phelps, because I know you've got to get off and do some teaching very soon. So thank you very much for joining us, Jenny. I'm just going to hand straight over to you, and away you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually teaching applied farmland ecology at the RAU, but I have pushed it back quarter of an hour, so we don't have to go at such a pace. So thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Jenny from the Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group. I've been asked to talk today about the learnings from our farmer group in the Upper Thames, the Farmer Guardians of the Upper Thames, and all of the amazing things that we've been involved with over the last 10 years, and how we can scale up the sort of vision for agroecology and regenerative farming across the landscape. And the culture really of change that is actually taking place now as a result, what we hope is scalable, really supportive to policy and getting the policy that we need right at this a really acute period of transition for agriculture in our countryside. So I've been lucky enough to be involved with our farming group, which we had huge support from Brian McDonald, who you heard earlier. We have 92 farmers now in our group, over 25,000 hectares in the Farmer Guardians. And talking about a culture shift is from what we really believe is, and what my passion is I really want people to feel that, you know, farmers do care about the environment, and that we are potentially the solution, not the problem. And that's the culture shift we need society to be able to understand. We've had a really fantastic template that we've used for our farmer groups from 2015, which has been around groups of farmers working together with communities along water bodies. So we have smaller subgroups within those bigger groups, and that's really to help people act on climate change, to take action, to help to explore how land management and land use can actually help with all the different issues that we're facing around climate change, so particularly flooding. But actually we want food and food production to be at the source of that. And this template of having groups of farmers working along water bodies is something that we've shared. We've now got 4 groups in Gloucestershire in all of those sessions that applications that Brian was mentioning, one in the Carron catchment, one in the Severn Vale, and one in Forest of Dean. But we've also helped share that template across many others, including sort of groups of farmers around Neff and Dorset and other places. But Brian will tell you there's some amazing examples of what people are doing all over the country. So we really feel that from the point of learning that I started on my journey was really when I sort of discovered all the amazing work that Ian Wilkinson was doing, and around, you know, all this rediscovery of the importance of soil biology, which I don't need to tell you about. You'll probably teach me more than I can tell you. But what I really learned really quickly was that people were ignoring the impact of water on our ability to do soil restoration, and that actually we need to look right across the landscape to be able to look at every field parcel, all the soft green infrastructure, hedges and trees and wetlands, and on all the hard infrastructure that humans have been putting into the environment for over hundreds of years, is actually affecting our ability to manage water. And that we can actually come together, we almost have to come together as groups of land managers, and it's essential that society values us for this opportunity to actually look at readdressing our ecological systems within food production as being part of that system. And obviously regenerative agriculture gives us that real opportunity to do that, and understanding the role of things like herbal lays and attenuating water within organic matter, rebuilding that ecology is all the stuff that I'm really passionate about. I'm very proud to teach a module at the RAU. So from about 2013, as I say, this farmer-led, everything we've done in Gloucestershire is about demonstrating that, you know, farmers do care about the environment, and that they must be included as part of the solution for climate action. So for our sins, we've actually applied for everything that's ever come across from DEFRA. So from 2012, we've been involved in the catch-and-paste approach. So we host, apologies for all the jargon, but we've been hosting the catchment in the Upper Thames. So there's 220 partners that are involved in looking at holistic land management, which includes all the parishes, district councils, water companies, lead local flood authorities, and obviously looking at the whole of the catchment and how all the farms fit within that, and helping all those individual farm businesses play a part within that. From that point, we went in 2013 to be involved in the Payments for Ecosystem Services DEFRA pilot, about how farmers can actually, who will pay for land use change. And in 2013, we've done an international case study of 20 communities working together with land managers and farmers through the WILD project. And it was really in 2015 that we were able to benefit from the funding that Brian's amazing fund enabled us to do. So that was really took us all on this learning journey around, oh my goodness, we can do all this if we grow herbal leaves and integrate livestock into the landscape, and amazing people that have inspired us along the way, international speakers, all of whom I'm sure you're very familiar with, Alan Savory. And so we wanted to explore with our group of farmers who were all on different journeys. Some people have been very much invested in conventional systems because that's the way that their business model works. And then we were sort of like meeting people who were halfway down this sort of inspirational journey, and some people who'd got there all the way and were teaching us about what we knew. So it was very much about how could we bring this group of farmers together to understand the barriers, as we've said, and the ability for us to make that change. And there's been just some extraordinary things that have come together over this, and Ed is one of the people who's on the call who is actually demonstrative of the change that is taking place, particularly with the younger generation. So obviously we focus very much on water and restoring water for soils and soils and habitat restoration, as I've mentioned, and particularly about biodiversity recovery. Our farmers were absolutely horrified to find that species they've grown up with, like curlew and all the rest, were actually declining. So action completely across the group around how they could start to look for, identify, restore specific biodiversity that was lost, that they had a cultural association with. And then obviously what we wanted to do was to actually start to say, well, how can we enable this change together? And I think what's been alluded to is, it is about educating people. I completely agree. It needs to be embedded within our agricultural system. And we have been involved with as many opportunities we can in helping businesses adapt within this. So we also have a Ahdb farm bench that we run alongside this as well. And as I say, involved in lots of other pilots, so farmer-led natural flood management pilots in the Colne, and also we've run 2 now ELMS trials looking at the essential role of a farmland in delivering ecosystem services, and also the essential role of an advisor to be able to facilitate the co-investment in land to be able to deliver multiple benefits and enable this agroecological transition to take place. So it's been an extraordinary opportunity really for us, because in this journey, we've actually realised that we could actually crack food inequality. If we can map the land collectively as farmers and land managers, and actually use UK habitat mapping as a system by which we can make an annual submission potentially to a county-based local nature recovery strategy, that aligns the opportunity for investment for delivering those public goods, so carbon capture, biodiversity net gain, water quality, flooding, air quality. If we can monetize those, that we can actually then enable these other food that is almost only affordable to the wealthy to be available for everyone. So our farmer group's also now involved in looking at how we might be able to start to demonstrate how food from these landscapes could actually be procured by our local authorities. We're looking at a £1.5 million worth of schools contract. We're trying to work out what food is coming from these landscapes and what are the ecosystem services that's been verified for us by Rothamsted and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And all of the dynamic procurement work that the National Farmers Union has done and the local food strategies with our local enterprise partnership is now looking to see how we could actually achieve this dream of being able to make food, nutritionally dense food, affordable for everyone. Particularly if it can be purchased as part of a more shortened supply chain, and that the money from the local authorities could buy this food, deliver their duties under the Environment Act, and actually be able to put nutrient dense food into our schools and hospitals, and create the business driver for that transition to be able to happen.
Jenny,
and just to finish off, really,
yeah.
just to say, I just really quickly will, just to finish off, is just to say that, this in our ELMS Phase 3, the opportunity for us is to develop a farm soil carbon code with all the partners, and welcome working with everyone, because if we can do that, we could help invest more money back into post-Brexit, post-COVID economic recovery, and help drivers for business change that all of our farmers would like to do. And they're really inspired. They just need help now, which it sounds like this huge partnership is going to help them. So thank you.
Super. Jenny, I want to come back very quickly with a question, just in terms of So I'm aware, like within your group of farmers, there's quite a lot of change going on, and certainly something I saw. I remember coming out of the first lockdown and seeing actually a whole host of transformations happening at farm level. And I know one of them that you mentioned to me is lots of people actually looking more at setting up community supported agriculture schemes within their farms, people that you would never expect. And I was just wondering, are there any other sense of mindset or behavior changes that you're seeing within that farming group that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, and I think the thing that is really amazing to me is some of the big conventional farmers that I've worked with for a long time, you know, they really have got the vision now. They want to do this. But the business models, I think, you know, as was being mentioned earlier on, you know, is that it's about the barriers to change are the fact that they're invested in a way of making money that on which lives and livelihoods depend. And I think that what we've got to try and understand is, you know, the government is at risk of creating drivers where big landowners now go into lovely agroecological countryside stewardship agreements that they actually are more sort of like renaturalising the landscape and possibly get the income from BPS loss from tourism. And there's a risk that actually that the big landowners will be beneficiaries of big schemes, and that the farmers will stop farming, and we can't let that happen. What we've got to do is find a way to let all these inspired conventional farmers transition into regenerative agriculture, not effectively be pushed off to become, you know, park keepers and tourism managers. And so, but I think what's brilliant is that lots of people are on that sort of cliff edge. And I always remember when I went to Groundswell, feeling that there was 1,000 farmers, you know, all inspired. It's the how we do it now. It's those barriers. Oh, we need a transition fund set up. I'm going to set up all of our environmental trusts. We're hoping in Gloucestershire, you know, we've already had a huge donation towards this agroecological recovery from 30 Percy over the next 3 years. We want to work with our local enterprise partnership to look at the impact of BPS loss, look at the opportunities we can create through, as I say, sustainable dynamic procurement, which would be amazing, but actually look at that co-investment. And we know we can sequester 60 million tonnes of carbon in Gloucestershire if we get our agroecological land arable management right, which is 600 pounds. You know, that might be something that we ought to be focusing on, and Elm should be the catalyst for this. You know, the DEFRA have done a brilliant job now enabling us to do mapping, to explore ecosystem service mapping, to look at, you know, integrated funding from advice, which is what we're all trying to champion. Partnership, collaboration, farmer collaboration, it's all there. We can see the vision. What we don't want is there to be a, you know, bog standard environment type Elm scheme that misses this extraordinary opportunity that we all have if we can crack this together.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Jenny. I know you've probably got to get in the car ASAP, but no, thank you, everyone. I'm conscious we're over time now and everyone needs some lunch. It's definitely important. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers, to Nikki, to Brian, to Tess, to Ben, and to Jenny. Really prompted a huge amount of thought and discussion. This, as we said at the start, is a massive area, not to be dealt with solely in a 90-minute Zoom call, but hopefully it's prompted a lot of discussion and thoughts within you and your own organisations joining this call. Please do let us know any further feedback or thoughts or ideas in our survey, which we'll send around afterwards. And the next session, the final session of this, will be in a few weeks' time. And this will really be about bringing this all together to focus on policy and how we go forward with some of these ideas and thoughts across the different UK nations at their various different stages of policy development. So it can be a really good session, but we'll have a bit of a break before we come back to that towards the end of March. So without further ado, thank you for everyone for coming along, for joining in the discussion. Thank you to Verity for sorting out all of the technology and lining up all the speakers and doing all of the really hard work. And thank you everyone for participating. The last thing I'll say is we've got a new piece of research report coming out next week, looking at the idea of an agroecology development bank to really start bridging the finance gap for new entrants, for small farms, for new techniques, and for tenants, which we know remains a constant hurdle in the idea of this transition. So look out for that next week, and we look forward to seeing you in a Zoom box sometime soon. All right, cheerio everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.